Good evening and welcome back to yet another episode of the HackableYou podcast. You're joined by me, Ed, your host, and my two esteemed friends and colleagues, Alex and Will. Guys, I don't know why I say good evening every single time I start this, because the listeners are going to be listening to this whenever they are. Might be first thing in the morning on a Saturday or Monday on their commute, and we're here saying good evening. I must come across slightly weird. Hey, how are you guys doing anyway?
Doing all right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world.
That covers us, I think.
Covering everyone there. Yeah, doing really well. Doing really good.
I mean, given the light nowadays, I think I wake up, it's dark. I work, don't really look outside, and now it's dark again. So it could be morning or evening. Who knows?
Doesn't really matter. It's always a good time for a HackableYou podcast, though, isn't it?
Hey, number one fan. Oh dear. Well, it is our Halloween special podcast episode. Add in some spooky after effects. Halloween is coming up round about when we release this podcast, so we thought we'd bring you a HackableYou Halloween special for episode 16. So all sorts of spookiness and darkness to talk about today. And with that lovely little link in, see what I'm doing here, guys? We will jump into the dark cybersecurity news for this episode. Cool, and here we are. Halloween special cyber news. I don't know why I said it was dark. I mean, pretty much all cyber news, I guess, is dark in some way. So let's just run with that, okay? And first up this week relates to a COVID-19 vaccine provider that have been hit by a cyber attack and data breach. Now, Dr. Reddy's is a global pharmaceutical company providing medicine and treatments for a host of problems and diseases. More recently known for being contracted to develop Russia's Sputnik V COVID-19 vaccine, they've been in the cyber news this week for falling victim to a cyber attack and data breach. According to reports, the data breach forced the big pharma to shut down labs in Brazil, India, Russia, and the UK. Furthermore, their own public response to the cyber attack stated in order to contain the issue, all data center services had to be shut down. The company hasn't released any details of the cyber attack and has declined to comment any further. However, related or not, this follows on from recent news in the summer from the Department of Homeland Security and the National Cybersecurity Centre here in the UK regarding increased levels of threats from advanced persistent threats due to the coronavirus situation. This may or may not be linked to cyber espionage, however, it's all a little coincidental, don't you think?
I think it's absolutely all linked together. There's been various reports warning of all sorts of state actors looking to either, benefit from the COVID pandemic or to gain potential advantages over other nations when it comes to COVID, and general medical research. The whole COVID response vaccine thing has become a political issue as much as a scientific issue. I don't think there's a single nation state that's not looking to ensure that they are leading that area, because whoever leads the vaccine race and is in a very advantageous position from a global political point of view.
Absolutely. You mentioned the race there, the race to get the vaccine, very similar to what the Cold War with the nuclear arms race. And, if that was happening nowadays, you bet your bottom dollar that cyber attackers were going after nuclear plans and developments and all these sorts of things. In fact, they still are today with the current presence of nuclear warheads. But you're absolutely right. There is a race now. Whoever gets this vaccine done properly and first, they're going to get the limelight, and everyone's going to want a piece of that pie. I'm not surprised that creators or producers of one particular vaccine, especially Russia's, are seeing some form of cyber attack.
I think it's really disappointing in many ways, because vaccines are so, I guess essential for us as a, as a species, and it's unfortunate to see, there's already loads of fake news going around about vaccine, and where these nations are rushing to try and get one up on each other, then I think it just breeds further, negativity and further risk of people saying, I don't think I'll go for it at a time when we need people to trust it the most, and we need the scientists to be, the key, the key there to make sure that people, trust these vaccines, because trust of vaccines is paramount. And if people feel like governments or nations are rushing them out to get one up on the other nation, then it's going to destroy vaccines trust for years to come.
As if they're not already controversial enough as it is.
So next up this week looks at Donald Trump's 2020 election campaign website being defaced by a cryptocurrency scam. Now, here we're talking about how hackers took over President Trump's 2020 election campaign website late on Tuesday, replacing parts of the website with a cryptocurrency scam before returning to its original content several minutes later. The website appeared to be defaced with a message stating this site had been seized, and mentions of fake news and a claim that multiple devices had been compromised to give full access to Donald Trump and his relatives. The crypto element here comes from a public vote posed by the threat actors asking people to donate Monero cryptocurrency to two wallets. One wallet for the alleged stolen data to be shared with the public, and the other to remain private. Whichever wallet had more funds in by the end date, the attackers would honour their result, supposedly. Guys, I feel like this is a bit of a waste on attackers if we're able to get control of the 2020 election campaign for the most hated, most loved presidential candidate in history. What do you think? Missed opportunity?
That's a terrible waste. Why didn't you spin up a phishing site? Why didn't you distribute malware? Really strange. They only had control of the site for about half an hour. And the campaign have said there's been no data compromise because allegedly data wasn't stored on the web server or the website. But web defacement is very, very low level, and it's a big waste of an opportunity. If you have a foothold like that, I'd like to think somebody more experienced and more motivated would have done a lot more.
I guess who knows if that has or hasn't happened, right?
Very
All we
true.
know is that something's been defaced with a bit of a cryptocurrency scam. It was only maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago we mentioned how, people use a bit of smoke and mirrors, something simple here to kind of distract people.
And I'm not going to, start claiming, that it was nailing it down to any particular threat actor. But if you think back to the last time President Trump had a website defaced, or it was probably after the drone strike attack in Iran, where Iranian, if you remember back, Iranian hackers then defaced some of the, I think they were like governmental websites and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Picture of Trump getting punched. Obviously, we're not saying it is Iran, because there's Iran, China, and Russia, who 3 major cyber capable nations that are all well known to have interest in the election campaign, or mostly for different reasons. Iran for probably repercussions, China because of the trade deals, and I don't think they really favour having Trump in there. The only nation out of those 3 that is interested in continuing Trump's presidency probably is Russia. So I think that's quite interesting, because I don't think you've probably ever, or perhaps we've never got to a point where where we've got 3 threat actors that all have different reasons for attacking the same Western target, and some of those are conflicting as well. So that's quite interesting in some ways, I think.
Conflicting yet share the same end, common denominator. We don't like Trump, we don't like the US in whatever way possible.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, it's the ultimate aim is an attack on Western democracy, society, etc., power. But for their own, they're playing their own games, despite them being fairly close.
And we're not the only cyber security organisation, podcast, content provider that has mentioned numerous times around cyber threats around the election campaign. Many vendors, many public security personalities have stated how cyber activity against this election in particular is really pivotal. It can really shape the future of the world and the way in which America and the rest of the kind of NATO type organizations and countries link together. I think a simple website defacement, albeit we've seen it, like you said before, with Trump, we've seen it with Theresa May during the Brexit campaigns and the UK election campaigns. Website defacement happens. There's a bit of a laugh and joke behind it. This time, a cryptocurrency scam, potentially, maybe not. I think other stuff is going on for sure that obviously isn't public known that could really impact the way in which this election goes. I just find it funny how website defacement is kind of what gets the most amount of attention here.
I think it's the other thing as well is that it's a kind of almost a continuation of the some of the issues of Trump's government at least, and their cyber hygiene, if we want to call it that, or procedures perhaps. And don't get me wrong, I'm not here to bash on any particular president. It just so happens that unfortunately Trump seems to be the
bash on Trump is fine. I think the majority of the globe does
in the news. But there was an article I think a couple of weeks ago now where a European security researcher essentially managed to guess Trump's Twitter password, that it was Mega.
I love myself 123.
I think it was like Mega or MAGA or something like
MAGA 2020.
One of his catchphrases or something, and then apparently another one of them at some point was "You're fired."
Make America great again, mate. MAGA, make America great again.
Oh, you know what?
If that didn't trigger in your brain,
I didn't even know. I had no idea what that stood for.
Oh, come on, man.
Yeah, and it's, I guess, and the question to raise there is, there are some real basics, cyber basics there that we, well, frankly, get taught to school children. Let's be honest.
Simple cyber hygiene, right?
Yeah, around password usage, and and I guess the ultimate question in my head is, how much can you trust someone to, be in control of, one of the biggest nuclear warhead stocks on the earth, who can't even pick a decent password.
You'll find that the nuclear missile codes in under Trump's presidency are probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That's too long. 1, 2, 3.
Too long. Yeah.
Just one button. It's a big red button under his desk, isn't it? Anyway, let's move on to our last news item for this week, which is a cheeky credential compromise. And we use that word because the popular high street peri-peri chicken restaurant Nando's has suffered a credential stuffing attack, leaving some customers angry after reports their accounts were used to place high volume orders. Nando's confirmed that while their systems had not been hacked, they were a victim of the popular and easy cyber activity that uses known usernames and passwords from previous data breaches to access new accounts where the credentials are the same. Credential stuffing is a headache, it's an annoying incident to deal with, but it always seems to cause a lot of noise and is relatively successful in the grand scheme of things. Guys, are you partial to a cheeky Nando's? Where does this rate on your piri-piri scale of hotness and cyber attacks?
Oh dear, he said it. For me, this is one of those rare occasions where I am going to side with the user here around potentially having a weak password, because like this, I went to a Nando's shortly after lockdown. So what you do is you rock up and then you scan in. Be
careful about what you're about to say, right?
No, here we go. So stick with me. So you rock up at Nando's, you scan in. And you wait for like 45 minutes, and then you have to sanitize and all this stuff to get in. You get shown to your table, and then you get told you have to order on your phone. And then you have to create an account. And I was like, oh, I don't want to create an account. I just want to order some food. So I can sympathize with people having some weak or some reused passwords only for this specific occurrence.
Call yourself a security professional. Get out. Where's the soap? Wash your mouth out. You're not supposed to be here.
When it comes to Nando's, I'm sorry, not much getting between me and my chicken.
Let's take a bet now. 50% or more of the passwords have the word cheeky in it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good shout. Probably have Nando's in it and probably have chicken in it.
And halloumi.
Oh, making me hungry.
Yeah, mate, honestly. When's the next HackableYou Nando's outing? I thought a really interesting part of this article, though, was that the app supposedly doesn't store payment information. So for an account to be compromised and orders to be placed that have left customers out of pocket, I don't understand how that equates, how that adds together.
It's definitely like a to be continued, isn't it? I think we're gonna learn some more about this in the coming days or weeks. Because you're quite right. The card information isn't stored on the account. So for an account to be compromised and then suddenly the customers have had their card details taken from the account when it's not there in the first place, a little bit odd. But what is good is that the restaurant have said they will refund any funds that have been taken fraudulently.
I think that says something. Do you not? Like, why give away money if you're not?
I know. It's like an admission, isn't it? It's like, yeah, I'm sort of sorry. Don't ask any more questions. Have some money back.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there we have it. That wraps up the cybersecurity news for this week. Interesting as always. I'm definitely hungry. But let's jump into our topic of the week. Topic of the week this week. We're going to change tact a little bit, bring you something a little bit different where we can extend topic of the week over a few podcast episodes. So we're going to bring you a 3-part series looking at the different hats within offensive and cyber security. Now, if you haven't heard the term of hats within security before, they are kind of taught within the cyber basics and the foundational elements of Security Plus and other similar cybersecurity certifications like we mentioned on the previous episode. And they are your white hat, your grey hat and your black hat hackers, researchers, cybersecurity professionals, whatever you want to name it. So we'll quickly give you an intro into what each one is, and then this week we're going to focus on white hat hackers. Next week we're going to dive into grey hat hackers, and then lastly we'll follow up with black hat hackers in the next episodes to come. So firstly, white hat hackers. A white hat hacker is a good guy, somebody who is paid or contracted to do a cybersecurity test, a penetration test, a simulated cyber attack against your organization where they not only have known approval and the company are fully aware on what's going on.
A black hat hacker is basically a malicious actor, a malicious hacker, the polar opposite to a white hat hacker. And I know there's been one thing I do want to mention as well. There's been some talk about in the industry, hasn't there, around changing some of these names because of some of the connotations that they carry. But yeah, and what I would say is I don't know if it's common knowledge, but did you guys know where the actual terms came from?
I believe it's from the Westerns. Is that right?
Yeah. So typically in Western films, the bad guys wore black hats and the good guys, the hero, wore white hats. But there you go. Anyway, that's just a little bit of history there. But I think where this, I think where this kind of plays in is, like we said, we've got the white hat and then the black hat and then you have the grey hat in the middle, which is obviously, you mix white and black and you get grey.
Ta-da. Tomorrow we'll learn shapes.
I'll leave it up to Alex to talk about grey hat.
Only because he's wearing a dressing gown whilst he records this. So are you 80 years old? But because that dressing gown is grey.
I've been exposed. Might as well admit it now. I'm in a nice big fluffy grey dressing gown. It's so warm and so cosy.
Go on, get your slippers on as well. You're old man.
I've already got them on.
I know you're 30 on Saturday. Happy birthday, by the way.
I'm not 30 on Saturday. Anyway, so moving on to your grey hat hacker then. Your grey hat hacker is like a hybrid between the white and the black. So they are someone that may have good intentions, but actually sometimes crosses the boundaries and will sometimes hack or research without permission. They'll push at the lines as to what is acceptable. So where you have your white hat who will always operate within a designated, defined scope and always has the intention of being good and always does what they're doing with permission. The black hat hacker has no permission. They have completely malicious intent. Bang in the middle is your grey hat hacker who may have some good intentions, but they push the boundaries of what's acceptable.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, guys. That gives a really good high-level overview into each component and each hat. But this week, we really want to focus on white hat specifically. Will, you've recently jumped into a shiny new position that looks at security testing in its completeness. So we mentioned white hat hackers being the good guys, being the people that are tasked and contracted to conduct security tests and assessments. I just want to dive in a little bit around, what that might look like, why companies might do it, and what benefits that provide to an organisation. So, from my point of view, and I'd be interested to know your guys' thoughts here. I think we all know security testing is a pivotal part of any security program. It allows you to identify vulnerabilities, holes, weaknesses in people, processes, or technology, and essentially shapes a lot of what a cybersecurity strategy might be. You have a couple of options. You can, have in-house talent that commit those penetration tests for you, although, we all know that's quite a hard role to fill. People often kind of dart around when they get quite skilled. And there's a lot of money to be made for companies who offer penetration testing, white hat hacking services. The likes of Pen Test Partners, Cisco, Orange Cyber Defense all kind of do these sorts of services. And the idea is you will scope a test with an attacker and say, I want to target X application, I want to target X area. Here's all of the information that you need. Please go ahead and attack it and give me a nice shiny report at the end that exposes what I need to fix. Is that a good way of describing it, Will? What are the real benefits for doing, white hat hacking, white hat security tests?
I guess, when we say the benefits of white hat, from an organisational point of view, you don't really have many options to have anything but a white hat.
Yeah.
Because if you're...
I guess there's an implicit black hat opportunity though, right?
Yeah, if you're paying someone to do a black hat test on you, then you've probably...
You've been had.
you've probably messed up somewhere along the line.
And you need
I'd
to
probably
speak to my
start packing your
uncle.
bag.
My uncle has an opportunity for you overseas if you fall for that.
But yeah, the benefits of of running tests, are very, as Ed said, really, it's about kind of identifying. It's essentially about identifying risks before the real attackers do. And there's there's loads of different tests and different areas you can test. You can test new applications and products that you build. You can test current security controls to make sure they're working. You can do a more kind of generic test, like what is called a kind of red team, where you're looking at a kind of wider scope. So it's quite a big subject, but it all comes down to really about paying someone to basically hack something that you own as an organisation and find those vulnerabilities and report those vulnerabilities to you before someone else does.
And a key thing to mention, right, it's all done because they've been given permission to do it. Someone hasn't approached them and said, oh, let me do a test for you and I'll give you a report. You would argue whether they're a white hat or not. It's all around kind of permission-based. It's known activity that's going on, and there are signed contracts in place that state, what can and can't be done. The other thing that is key to mention for white hat security tests or white hat hackers is that they tend to follow defined ways of working and frameworks of assessment. So if you're asking them to assess web applications, they will often follow processes aligned under the OWASP frameworks and other sorts of known ways to test things, which means the report you get follows some form of standardized format, which then is the kind of the singular language that's used across the board within security. You get CVSS scores, links to known CVEs and other sorts of things like that make a report easy to understand and ingest, albeit sometimes can be very, very technical. So Alex, you mentioned earlier that a white hat hacker is really on the fence between that grey hat hacker, right? They are ultimately good and have approval, whereas the grey hats kind of sit on that line. Where does that line end? Would a white hat hacker cross the line? What's the kind of reasons why white hats are white hats and not grey hats, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So it's really important for the white hat hacker to remain within the scope of what's been agreed, and remain within the parameters of the test that you've asked them to do. There's actually lots of legal implications by deviating outside of that, and there's various across the globe, but in the UK you have the Computer Misuse Act. It makes a whole host of activity illegal, from unauthorized access to unauthorized access with intent. So to circle back and answer your question there, the white hat hacker would always stick within the parameters of what's been agreed due to these legal ramifications. Essentially, they'd
be breaking the law if they went outside of
Absolutely,
it, right?
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And that's, where that blurred line is kind of absolute, And I guess to give an example of that, if I was to ask Will to come and test an application and that application had a few databases, I'd be very specific to say to my white hat hacker Will, this is my application, here's the IP addresses, please test the database, find vulnerabilities, but don't do anything else. And if Will was to then discover a middleware layer that's not linked to the specific application and was to breach that, cause an issue, or access data he shouldn't, all of a sudden you're outside the scope and could potentially be prosecuted, done for Computing Misuse Act or any other kind of contractual legality there might be in place.
Okay, and if you want to know a real world example of what happens, I can't remember the exact case for it, but there's loads. Well, there's been a few cases in the US where pen testers have been arrested for inadvertently going beyond their scope, or people believed that they had gone beyond their scope, and they've been arrested, charged, and punished for it. So it's not something that your average pen tester is going to take lightly. They're going to be deadly serious, and want to have a real rock solid scope and rules of engagement to really ensure that they're not going to become a full victim to to some sort of legal proceedings.
What I find really interesting about white hats are they absolutely have the skills and decision to be a grey hat or ultimately a black hat. The guys and girls, men and women you're hiring to do these security tests are sitting in your rooms or against your applications, ultimately doing it for the good and the betterment of your organisation, albeit for a fee. There's nothing stopping them apart from their own morals about turning around and doing something malicious, because ultimately they have the skills to do so. And we'll touch a little bit on in another episode about black hats who have bad people that have gone good, and how governments and law enforcement tend to sway the bad guys into becoming the good guys, kind of thing. But I always do find that you're giving someone a lot of power, and these are dangerous people really at the core. And that wraps up the topic for this week. White hat hackers, the good guys. Hopefully you learned something there, and we will dive further into this topic and the 3-part series with grey hat hackers and black hat hackers in the next few episodes. But thank you anyway, guys, for your input on that one. So, Halloween. It's all about being spooky. It's all about nighttime and the darkness, and we would not be honouring our Halloween special if we didn't talk about the mysterious dark web in this week's Secrets from the SOC. So, the dark web, guys, a topic that I'm pretty sure everyone loves to listen to, a real unknown within the industry and within the public, and something that it has a number of horror stories or horror rumours and myths surrounding it. And what we want to do in Secrets from the SOC this week is expose what is the dark web and why an organisation and you working within a security operations role should care about it. So guys, the dark web. What is the dark web? Please, what's the best way that you can summarise it? And I challenge you not to use the iceberg mentality and the iceberg analogy. Will's laughing because there's no other way.
It's a very scary portion of the internet.
Done. Sentence over.
And what I think will be really useful in this segment is if we do some dark web myth busting as well, because it is very big and very scary. And if you don't know what it is, it could be quite intimidating.
Absolutely. I mean, in fairness, right? Myths. Can you buy drugs on the dark web? Yes. Can you buy hitmen on the dark web? Yes. Are there nefarious, child exploitation, human trafficking, and all these other horror stories on the dark web? Yes. But, these things happen outside of the web with gangs and all sorts anyway. It's just another digital way of doing it. But accessing the dark web, there's not a special dance you need to do. You don't need to say Beetlejuice in the mirror 3 times or Bloody Mary in the mirror 3 times. It's actually quite easy to get to. And although it's got the word dark in it, doesn't necessarily mean everything about it is bad. What have you got to say to that, Alex?
Yeah, so to put it into a very simple layman's term to describe what the dark web is, it refers to websites that are not indexed. So they're not easily accessible. They're not sitting there on the surface. You can't access it through your normal web browser. You can't just Google and get results from the dark web. You have to use specific software such as Tor. There are a couple of other ways to get there as well, but you have to use some specialist software to get onto dark web. And like you said, there are some really dark corners of the dark web and some very, very illicit stuff on there. However, it's not illegal to use the dark web because there are some very legitimate use cases for anonymizing yourself on there.
Yeah, definitely. I think the dark web has privacy at its core, and as an implicit, like you said, a private way of browsing parts that you mentioned, Alex, are unindexed. A couple of use cases for the dark web, things like Facebook, they have a dark web page and a dark web presence. It's a .onion link for Tor. But you also have things, and we mentioned around drug sales, Silk Road. People probably would have heard of Silk Road before, which was like a modern day eBay for buying and selling illicit drugs online and other kind of materials and goods. And these things have just kind of evolved and grown, and there are multiple what they're called marketplaces on the dark web now. And yeah, like you said, it's a hidden place that's not as easy to access, but easy to access. The way that the Tor browser works is, so Tor is what you use to get access to the dark web. You log into Tor, and rather than going from your home internet connection, bouncing across the public servers and landing on a web server at somebody else's end, what Tor will do is it will ping you across multiple different routes, across multiple different locations to anonymize where you're coming from, so that the end website that you're browsing only sees the source IP of one of the routes, rather than it being your home IP address or you. So essentially, in that way, it kind of anonymizes you. But, the reason we're talking about it is because of its darkness and the scary nature of it, because it's Halloween. And I think that's what I really want to call out, is the interesting side of the dark web, where you have taken what we've mentioned, I'm pretty sure one of the first podcast episodes, a current crime, drug dealing, human trafficking, whatever it might be, assassins, and you're giving it a digital forum in which for it to be used in. You talk about all these horror stories you hear about the dark web, and I just urge you to Google some of the stories and take them with a pinch of salt. But from my layman's terms, as someone that's not sitting on there every single day, but working alongside researchers that are, there's an element where a lot of these stories are true. You only have to look at documentaries. I can't remember what the name of the documentary on Amazon Prime is, but it's all about Silk Road and Ross Ulbricht, who, is in prison not just for drugs, but really for hiring a murder or contracting a murder against someone via the dark web. And these things do happen. And if you're going to be one of these people that just wants to hop on Tor and start having a browse, I would ask you to be cautious. Understand that using a VPN is the best way of doing it, and you definitely want to keep the software up to date, and just be very careful about what you're strolling through and what you come across, because you can quite easily hop onto things that might put you in a place where you do not want to be. So what does that really mean from an operational kind of SOC role, me working in a private or public sector company that doesn't nearly need to interact with the dark web at all? I think from my experience, yes, there needs to be a private concern and a thought about what threat the dark web represents. In most cases, it's a place where data that might have been exposed from a data breach is going to be publicized, sold. Discussions against potential plans of cyber activity against an organization can all be seen within dark web forums as well. And there are companies out there that you can pay to monitor the dark web for you and highlight to you when they find things. I mean, I've worked with companies in the past knowing that they've had things on marketplaces advertised before with their name in, or whether they've had forum posts with discussions based on current activity. Maybe it's malicious cyber activity. Maybe it's just a news thread on the dark web, and you're able to detect these things. And I think it's almost like having half an eye on the dark web as an industry and as an organization. It's nothing. In most cases, it's nothing you need to have a full focus on. Need to be sitting there indexing it every day, searching for these things. Absolutely, there are organizations, those that work in weapons, those that work in defense or politics, that probably have a bit more activity on the dark web than most. I think like I said, majority of organizations, having half an eye on it, having someone monitor that for you and highlighting any potential problems provides the benefit to you in a SOC role. What do you guys think of that? Would you argue against that? Would you say that's about right?
No, I think I'd agree with that. I think, yes, in an ideal world, it's, depending on what your business is obviously, monitoring it is a good idea. being aware of it, just generally not worrying about it too much, and perhaps familiarising yourself with being able to access it should you need to for any, incident response purposes, or any, what I'm saying is, if you ever needed to interrogate it for whatever reason, then, it's good to experience that and know how to do it. But yeah, I wouldn't, it's not it's not something you should be having nightmares of.
We never forget we have time to jump into our spooky key takeaways for this week, starting with Alex. Give me your HackableYou Halloween special key takeaway.
I joked about it earlier on in regards to password reuse, but a reminder to always use a unique password, and if you can, use a password manager to avoid credential stuffing.
What's spooky about that? Come on, man. Where's the theatre? This is a podcast. This is a show, man. Where's the entertainment? Come on,
should I do my witch laugh
it.
again? Yeah, there you go. Moving on.
Okay, moving on. Will, coming to you for your key takeaway for this week.
I'm going to say, when it comes to the dark web, familiarise yourself with it. Like Alex said, nothing wrong with logging on and having a look around, but do be a bit careful. There is some stuff on there that you don't want to see, both legally and mentally. But absolutely check it out and make sure you are aware of it.
And my key takeaway for this week is making sure you understand the 3 types of hats there are within offensive security: your white hat, your grey hat, and your black hat. And to be sure to tune into the next few episodes to find out more on the other 2 we didn't speak about today. And that wraps up the podcast for this week. I want to thank everyone for listening. We wish you have a happy Halloween. Being stuck inside, go trick-or-treating, but remember to remain 2 meters apart. And we wish you all a very good day and weekend.
Don't have nightmares. Sleep tight.